Well, I am so happy to be here tonight because, like we said earlier, one of the issues that, well, many of us have dealt with is that we did not know there were other progressive voices in our midst because of what comes across in mass media. A lot of times, and when we talked about those historical victories, when people build coalitions and fight the good fight and win, people have silenced themselves because they think that they're in the minority, because they don't even know about how they can speak up with confidence, even if they might be outnumbered in the cafeteria at their job site. But across the district, because we don't just have people here in my hometown, Toccoa, Georgia, there are people who share our same values and ideas, but we can also convince people amongst us. So my question is, you are running against Doug Collins. What specific things are you thinking about as your priorities for the 9th District? Because one of the things that I realized coming back to my hometown after several years, living in Western North Carolina, living in Maryland, living in New Jersey, living in Chicago in grad school, is that this is a unique part of the state because it is Appalachia. Right. But a lot of times I know that my friends who I grew up with, who may happen to be poor white people, feel like they're not heard when it comes to the state. Their misperceptions about, leadership in Atlanta or whatever. So I'm a little bit more concerned because I'm living here now as an adult about the 9th District. So are there a couple of things that you can share with us about your vision for representing this area of the state?
Thank you. You're right. So my number one, one of my political philosophies is this. I have this idea about power. I believe that once people get in power, I don't think you have to hold any punches, pull any punches on talking about people in power. They're in power. They're insulated from our lives. So, when they're corrupt, call them corrupt. When they take money in exchange for legislative favors, I call that a bribe. I don't call it campaign financing, right? So don't mince words about people in power. But also, when you're talking to people on our level, though, on my level, on your level, people who have to get up to work in the morning, and people who, it's not everybody has the time or the inclination to be a political scientist. That means that it's our responsibility to take a message to them that is, for one thing, a diverse coalition of imperfect people, and welcoming. So, I think that one of the many mistakes along the line in 2016, when Hillary Clinton talks to coal miners, right, and tells them, one of my goals is to put you out of business, right? There's a point to be made that the Democratic Party has become too much of an elitist party, where we don't accept messy people who don't have as good of an education. They don't know all the codes, how to talk about a diverse society, and we do a lot of code talking. So if somebody talks about race or sexuality in a way that maybe is different from you, I would say try to look at their heart, because a lot of times the heart is not nearly as harsh as their words. Their words are something that has come down from a message board somewhere from the internet. But that's one thing I would think is, Democrats have got to get away from lecturing people and telling our own story. Notice the strength of the conservative movement has been that they have a solid message beginning of the morning until they go to bed at night. And they can send somebody as zany as Kellyanne Conway. Right? Now, as loopy as she sounds, she gets on CNN and she has this one or two phrases that other Republicans have said all day long, and the rest of the day, CNN's talking about what Kellyanne Conway said, which isn't right, amplifies her voice. First, take in messy people. Did you guys watch the Tea Party? There were some messy people in the Tea Party movement, right? We got to welcome people who are messy, who aren't, ready. Yes, it is. And accept people. And of course, nothing wrong with pointing out people when they're being prejudiced or whatever. But at the same time, give them a path forward, right? So give them a path of entry. One thing, and I'll close with, I don't want to go on a long lecture. A lot of strategies. We got to tell our own story and get our own people, progressives, fired up. Show them that they have a choice. But another thing is try not to make Republicans hate you too much. Like, don't fall into the trap of being the way we are portrayed already on Fox News all day. I have some friends, unfortunately, on Facebook who really love to give the lectures, who put down the ignorance of people on Facebook who may not have this correct grammar. Oh my, yeah. And so, what better way for conservatives to walk away and say, "Yep, those people on the left, they're all so elitist, they're snobs, they got this education, and they think they're better than we are now." So that's another thing, right? Accept messy people, stay true to the message. Try not to make them motivated to vote against us, right? Look that neighbor in the eye and say, "This is what I want, and this is why I'm voting. I don't want to take your guns. I want to protect us from dangerous people," right? I don't want to, so I think that's the key. Is trying to talk to people and be neighbors in such a way. We're talking about political activism on the street, neighbor to neighbor. Be compassionate. Love your neighbor. I know we want to get religion out of politics, but I think that's a humanist approach. If you love your neighbor, right? If you love your neighbor, you are right. Yeah, none of the. The crazy thing about, and I'm going to talk just a bit about religion right now, if you don't mind. The weird thing about some Christians in America, if you ever read the Gospels, at the beginning of the Gospel, and Jesus does this awesome thing, like he heals this person, and when they say, "Oh my gosh, you're the Son of God," and he says, "Yeah, but don't tell anybody." It says it in the Gospel, in Mark. He says, "Yes, but don't tell anybody about this." And yet we never hear the end. I am the real Christian. I am, God's on my side. I don't think God's on the Democrat side. I don't think God's on the Republican side. I think God, my personal belief is that God's on everybody's side, which is, a message of human equality. But I also think he's on atheist side. Right? No, exactly. Right. You're right. There are Buddhists. There are pagans. I mean, there are a lot of there's a lot of, diversity. And I think that Jesus also taught us not to be jerks. Yeah. And, right, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I think that also applies to people of other religions, right? Do unto them as you would have them do unto you. So I use that rule, which I think is also a humanist rule. I don't think it's necessarily incompatible. So, but I think I had another question over here. But my daughter wanted to say something. Is it okay if I give her the microphone for a second?
I just have a quick thing. I'd like to add a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. that your speech reminded me of. He said that peace is not merely the absence of tension, but the presence of justice. And also, I'd like to ask, how are you going to give people jobs in this area? Because people are so concerned about their jobs being taken away by Hispanics, being taken away by robots. And we also need to be concerned with our environment. How can we fix all of these things at the same time?
I'm in Toccoa.
I promise she did not rehearse this question. This is just Kate. That's how she is. So thank you, Kate. Luckily, I've already got a plan. Like, that would really be bad if she asked me a question I'd have an answer. What the amazing thing is, and this is another, by the way, idea from Martin Luther King that you'd often not hear in the history books. Martin Luther King said, in this country, the richest country in the history of the world, you ought to be able to walk in off the street if you don't have a job. Your business just went down. Go into the labor office and say, "I need a job," and there should be one there waiting for you. Do we really want to reward hard work? Well, we need to make sure work is available for everybody who's able-bodied. I do believe in that plank of Martin Luther King. We reached full employment in the 1940s in the middle of a Great Depression. We were at full employment. These are things the history books don't really talk about that much, but it's true. It's right in front of our face. And we built the economy off of work for several decades. Offering full employment when we were not as wealthy of a nation as we are now. So, what they were fighting in World War II, the reason there was so much demand was because the government needed a whole lot of planes to fight a war. But I don't think we need to fight as many wars as we do. In fact, I think that we need to use war as the very last resort after diplomacy. Because I'm a Christian, and because I'm an American, right? Both those things. Yes. Right. I mean, look, we can't get enough of Afghanistan, right? In fact, one of the things that candidate Trump said that I agreed with, now President Trump has changed that, but candidate Trump said that he was going to pull us out of Afghanistan. I thought that would be good. If he does that, I will be the first to say, good job, Donald Trump. But unfortunately, he reversed himself and said, no, not only are we staying there, we're actually going to send more troops. So, yeah. And what's the goal? What's the end point? Who knows? But how to get jobs? What's the next big battle? It's not Russia. I don't want to get in a war with Russia. It's not Iraq. It's not Iran. The next big conflict is with climate change. But how to bring about, a plan to confront climate change without making people think there's going to be jobs lost, it's going to hurt the economy. Use it as an opportunity. What if we had a high-speed rail system coming from Toccoa all the way to Atlanta, where you could get there?
Because we have an Amtrak stop, right?
Exactly, right. You could get there, and in fact, we could make sure that every community had those green jobs, solar panels, wind turbines, which, by the way, was last year the fastest growing job in the country, much higher than others. So if we had a green revolution and invested in infrastructure, which was another thing, by the way, that I agreed with candidate Trump on, different from President Trump, but candidate Trump said we need to spend about $1 trillion in infrastructure spending. That's what we need to do. We just handed $1 trillion to Jeff Bezos and the Walmart family. We can afford $1 trillion to put people to work, right? So that's my idea about confronting climate change. Think of all Los Angeles, think of all the greenhouse gases we would save with a high-speed rail system into Los Angeles, right, out of the suburbs. Yes?
I just want to inject a little bit of news that keeps being hidden by all the stuff we keep hearing on the news. Right. He imposed a 30% tariff on solar panels last week, which could kill
a lot of jobs.
Almost 250,000 jobs.
Right. I want to point out, this is not the first time America's been here, by the way. In the early 1920s, America was very worried. Many people in America were very worried because a lot of immigrants, like me, were coming in. Irish Catholics from Eastern Europe. And a lot of Americans were worried about changing culture. So in the early 1920s, they clamped down on immigration from Eastern Europe. They made explicitly racist immigration laws in the early 1920s, and they imposed tariffs and protective trading. I don't know if you guys have read your history books about how well that policy worked out. By the way, that's true. But on top of that, they also passed massive tax cuts for the wealthy in the 1920s. But the bill always comes due. That's what James Baldwin said, right? The bill always comes due. You think we can build a society off of hate and fear and resentment, and you think that's not going to hit everybody's pocketbook? These things have consequences. And look at Alabama. The protection, they passed a harsh bill in 2010. We're going to make sure and not have any more illegal immigrants in Alabama. And go and talk to the farmers in Alabama who own farms about trying to find people who will do that work. So I think we need to have a humane and sensible immigration system. We need to make sure and have a smart trade plan so that we do encourage American hiring, but that we also, when it would be profitable for us as a nation and sensible economically, have trade. But we need to, make sure it's environmentally healthy. There are a lot of things that we, and it needs to be more open. I don't believe in these secretive trade negotiations. I think that the trade proposal should be open to the public before it's signed. None of this, no more secrecy. So.
I wanted to pull you back to the question that the woman over there at the table asked earlier about what do you see as the biggest issues for rural areas?
Oh, for this? Oh, sorry. Yes. So jobs, for one thing. Get people on the side of the Green Revolution by employing them in the Green Revolution, giving them jobs. Nothing better than a job. A job is so much more than a paycheck, right? A job is somewhere you go in, you have community. You see people who are different from you, and you work together on a common goal. I mean, there are people around here who work for the Forestry Service, and because of the Democrats' weak message, they are Republicans, right? But they are so dedicated to protecting wildlife. Let me tell you something that happened this past year. We heard a lot about how the popular mass movement kept Congress from overturning Obamacare, the ACA. But not a lot of people heard about, they were planning on selling off millions of acres of parks. And conservatives, true conservatives, who actually wanted to conserve something, raised hell with their own congressman, and they backed off because they are invested in the environment. So first of all, get people in this area invested personally in the fight to save our environment for the next generation. Healthcare, though, is still up there. I mean, rural hospitals are closing in Raven County if you want to have a baby. Now, we call ourselves pro-life. They have to drive to Toccoa to have a baby. Oh, they stop it at Stevens County. Gainesville now? Where? Habersham? Habersham.
I mean, we're still open, but they're limiting if you don't have proof of insurance or ability to pay, and you're not deemed an emergency, you're going to be turned away.
Wow.
In Habersham County.
And see, I think that's an important, and I don't want to problematize things, but I think
That was out in the paper just like last year.
as you run, these things are shifting under our feet because, like you said, so I'm thinking, what will some young person who has to have a baby do if they live in Stevens County, for instance? I mean, what's the web of, I can't go here, I can't go here. I mean, that is, go back to healthcare, that specific thing. And even if you think about what I've been kind of tracking is the people living in an area going down. Like there's a shift out of some of these counties. We're losing population.
Right.
We're losing young people.
Partly because of healthcare opportunities.
Because if you're a young couple and you want to have a family, you can't be here.
You can't have jobs. You're living income.
Right.
There's people not jobs.
Minimum wage cannot afford
Right, you're right.
an apartment. Some of them can't even afford to share a
Yeah.
Exactly.
Our rate is 25%
Yeah.
here.
Right, yeah, it's very high poverty. It's very high
And the
poverty.
other issue is drugs. I work for a small
And that's
manufacturer.
another thing too.
We sometimes have trouble hiring
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
because they can't pass the
Exactly.
drug test.
Exactly.
We have positions go unfilled because they're not
Right.
passing drug tests.
And I want to address that, but I want Corey to.
Well, and you hit all over, like, talking about what we can do in 9th District, I think,
pointing out the problems in the healthcare and how a one-payer system could help prevent those problems.
And then
But
address
also,
these.
most of us that live in the 9th District, and I think your 9th District goes, I know it goes past Jasper, I don't know how far west it goes, but it's out there.
It goes all the way out to Pickens County, it's 20 counties.
yeah.
Partial through Pickens, partially through Forsyth, all the way to the Tennessee border, all the way to the South Carolina
So
border.
I'm sitting here thinking, what's the common denominator? It's health care.
Healthcare.
But you know what, the other thing is, and it's jobs, but it is the environment. We don't
Yes.
live here
There we
because
go.
we live here because we have running water,
Yes.
mountains, and trees. We
Yes.
don't live
Tell
here
them.
because we have the best job in the world and we get made
We
the
don't
most
say that
money.
enough.
No, we live here because we like this land.
Right.
And so people need to understand that we're the ones trying to keep this
And
land.
it's only talked about when it's talked about in terms of ecotourism. It's not talked about in terms of the people who actually live in here
Yeah,
and enjoy it.
We have to drink the water too, by the way.
Right.
Right, we still drink well water.
Yeah, right. I grew up on well water.
Yeah.
I believe that there's a House bill that just recently passed that concerns me greatly, and it has to do with being able to do logging on large areas
of the Chattahoochee National Forest,
Yes.
including in Stevens County up to and including Curry Mountain.
Yeah.
That has passed the House. I don't know that it has passed in the Senate yet, but what they're talking about doing is that it's a huge amount of territory.
Yeah.
We're talking about affecting our water, our air, our environment. It's just recreation too, but
Well,
I'm concerned about that.
there's, I want to get to the drug problem too. But what you guys have mentioned, none of this will be fixed unless we first attack campaign financing. None of it. Right? Now, it's going to be hard, no joke, and of course everybody's going to have to be involved, right? Not just people who are running for office. But I personally don't think that any private money should go to somebody running for public office. Because you can't vote your conscience or vote for, excuse me. That's what it's like, Doug Collins has $1.5 million, by the way. And I've raised $20,000, which is pretty good for this early. But, I'm meeting the people instead of having the money. So, and I'm also refusing any corporate donors. Although that's kind of, if you've heard me talk, I think that corporations, especially who make millions and billions of dollars, should pay more tax. They're not going to pay me money anyway. But it's kind of like when I was in middle school. Like, I didn't want to go out with that pretty girl to the prom, the dance anyway. But I'm not going to take their money, even if miraculously did. SunTrust and the music industry, a lot of people have given to Doug Collins. But anyway, we're not going to address preserving nature while corporations can write huge checks and pay for people's staff to get elected. And after they get out, get a job there, right? We've got to attack corruption. Did you guys know that the number one concern for voters, this is bigger than terrorism, is corruption? Because it steals your voice and it steals my voice. The odd problem that we have in America right now, we fought a revolution because of taxation without representation. Now, these huge corporations like Apple, they say, oh, we can't afford to pay, what they did in the 50s, right? In the 50s, the corporations paid 33% of the federal budget. And our economy was really good then. Now they pay about 11%, even though they have more of the wealth. But Apple will tell you we can't afford to pay fair share in taxes for roads, healthcare, education. But then when election season comes around, they find the money, don't they? They find that money they couldn't pay, which means it's not just money, it's power. Instead of having taxation without representation, which is what we have, they have representation without taxation at the top. So we've got to address that problem. And of course, once again, people say, you can never do it, you can't change it, it's too corrupt. I know I can't by myself. But I know that the people can, because the people started prohibition, which I think was a bad idea, and then they decided, nope, that was a bad idea, and they overturned prohibition. Right? They have added amendments before in much worse times than we have now. Right? In the early teens, the 20s, the early 30s, the mid-30s, those were awful times for everybody, and they did more with their government than we are doing now. So I think we'd have to add an amendment. And my personal philosophy is this, and I want to get very close to this. I want to establish a system where independents can run. I don't like our two-party system, right? And I want people to be able to get enough signatures, realistic number of signatures, so that they can run as an independent. And if they get enough signatures and whoever wins the primary in the Republican and Democratic parties, I want them to be able to go on the ticket and then to have a bare bones, bare staff minimum paid by the government. And to start our political season at a sane time, like 3 months, that's enough to hear Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. That's enough time. And then go on public television, which we already pay for, give them some debate time. That's all the money we need. Any private money going to them should be outlawed in that amendment. So I think that's what we need. That's my idea. Yes?